All right, let's welcome into Straight Fire a first-time guest on the podcast. And we've never done this before. But guys, last year when actually 2 years ago when Caitlin Clark started to blow up, we did some podcasts on her and the numbers were big. And then last year we brought on some guests to talk Caitlin Clark and the numbers were big. So we're going to go back to the well. Caitlin Clark in the WNBA season begins Saturday. So we're having Ben Pickman on from The Athletic to talk about obviously the WNBA at large, but mostly Caitlin Clark. Ben, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, Dad, thanks for coming on. I'm just curious from your point of view. You've been a journalist for several years now, and you've covered a lot of sports. I am just curious if you've seen an uptick in whether it's invites to come on podcasts, your articles getting more clicks, Indiana Fever demand. Like, just tell me what's going on at the ground level there.
Yeah, all of the above is the answer to your question there, Jason. I mean, yeah, I think, as we have seen with TV ratings skyrocketing, like I'm not going to say I have proportionally received millions of more requests. I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration there. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot more interest in terms of readership, listenership of our podcast, people just in casual conversations among friends, among peers, among family members, just people taking a lot more interest in the WNBA and women's college basketball. And this year, certainly, I think is the most, it seems like the most anticipated season after last year, which was the most
Yeah.
anticipated season then. So everything continues to really build on each other. And it's definitely an exciting time to kind of be covering the sport and, a very important moment in the sport's history as well.
Yeah, I am just curious. Like historically, when you have been around the league, and I mean, there was a buzz. Obviously, the league's been around for 20 some odd years, whatever it is. But it feels like, as you said, in the last year or two, things have gone to the stratosphere. I mean, is it the stage where you're like mapping out your season, where you're going to be traveling? I mean, are you with the Fever all the time? Is there that appetite to just kind of play the hits and give the beast what it wants to eat, which is a lot of Caitlin Clark?
Yeah, I mean, I'm New York based personally. So
Okay.
I'm actually around the Liberty on a pretty daily basis. Cover
Oh,
the league nationally, but I'm around the Liberty all the time. I will now coming this weekend. I'll be at the Fever's home opener though, and was out there during training camp too. And so, I think have some more trips planned along the way. So it's certainly a lot of Fever and a lot of monitoring obviously where they are, and we obviously do a ton of Fever coverage too. But yeah, I mean the appetite really has grown. And it is pretty crazy to just kind of reflect on even 2, 3, 4 years ago where this league was compared to where it is now.
yeah. I saw in your Thunder preseason wrap up piece, it was like almost breaking down the last roster spot. And I mean, Ben, I'm going to
Yep.
be honest with you. I couldn't have named 20 players in the WNBA like 5 years ago. And I'm going to guess that's the situation at large with sports fans. But now it's like, oh, Fever did a lot of stuff in the offseason. Only five starters are back. Are you sensing when you write a piece instantly, it's like, oh my gosh, look at the numbers. Are you tracking how they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of metrics you're saying, or in terms of
Yeah.
just the roster spots?
Well, metrics mostly.
Yeah, I mean, we get access to some of that data, and there's certainly an appetite for Indiana Fever coverage. I would say, again, generally, like there is increased appetite on every team. And the one thing I will say, more than anything else, to your kind of starting question, it is in the off season where we really saw a shift, I would say, where, in January, free agency was a huge, time. That's when WNBA free agency is, mid-January to early February. Huge buzz there, like we have never really seen before, people caring about transactions and trades and rumors. This past offseason, there was a record numbering of firings in the WNBA. And so people were really interested from a coaching hirings and firings carousel standpoint about like, why is this happening? Who's getting hired? Who's interviewing with whom? Like people really do are invested in all of that kind of stuff in a way that we have seen traditionally with men's sports, but in a way that the WNBA has lagged behind.
Yeah. Now we had Cindy Brunson on the pod last year, I think. Yeah, last year to talk about kind of the Caitlin Clark impact. And she was pretty blunt and like, listen, Jay, there's a lot of players who are kind of annoyed that the media only cares about Caitlin Clark. There's been a lot of great players in the league. There's a ton of them now. And all anybody wants to talk about is Clark. Are you also sensing that? Or was that like a last year story this year? It's not as much of a big deal.
Yeah, I don't really think it is a big storyline or a big talking point among players this year. And honestly, I don't really think that narrative even carried throughout the end of last year. I think, once the games really got going and you saw just how prolific a player she was, and, she's a player who made first team all WNBA as a rookie, setting, assist records, point records, like rewriting the rookie record book, and even some kind of broader record books. Like you kind of have to you couldn't do anything but kind of tip your cap, right? Kind of
Yeah.
as a competitor. And so, I think that's kind of the state of play entering this year. Indiana again has made a ton of moves to put themselves right into the finals championship conversation, adding a number of veterans. And so like they're one of the teams that has a lot of expectations, and they're covered and talked about, in this quartet of four, the way other title contenders across other sports are. So
Is there? I saw your pick for the championship. Now, listen, I am. I'm just. Sometimes I'll just do gambling for fun. And last year I bet the Indiana Fever to win the title and Caitlin Clark to win the MVP. Obviously, long shots didn't happen, but I decided I'll do it again this year. The odds have shrunk considerably, but I saw you
yes.
pick Liberty over the Aces. First of all, why do you think Indiana's not quite there yet? Obviously, it's only year 2 for Clark, but also why the Liberty over the Aces?
Yeah, I mean, to your Indiana question first, and you know this from covering other sports and thinking about all different kinds of sports, not just professional basketball. So often a team has to go through learning experience and build that kind of postseason scar tissue up together first before they get over the hump. I mean, we just saw that, on Tuesday night in the NBA with the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? A 64-win team who number 1 seed goes out in the second round the way they did. The Indiana Fever have just 5 returning players, just 5 from last year. And while 3 of those players are all-stars in Kelsey Mitchell, Aaliyah Boston, and Caitlin Clark, the rest of the roster, again, a lot of new pieces. A head coach who, had previously been the head coach of the Fever and had a lot of success in Connecticut, named Stephanie White, an experienced head coach, but again, first-year head coach coming in to coach this new team that, again, full of new players. So I just think it will take a little bit of time for this team to gel together. And there's just a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions about rotations, minutes, roles, a lot to get sorted out. And it just seems like a big leap. Again, the Indiana Fever, they haven't had a winning record since 2015. They haven't gotten out of the second round of the playoffs since then. So sure, they have Caitlin Clark, who's obviously a headliner, and they have a talented roster behind them. But, it's a pretty big jump to go from first round out to WNBA champion.
Yeah, that is a quantum leap. Let me ask you about White. So, in the NBA, it's a players' league where a lot of times they have a say in the coach. I'm just curious, in your reporting, did you come across anything that said, the Fever kind of ran this by Caitlin Clark to see what she thought? I'm sure nobody would ever come out and say that openly, but you gotta face the franchise face of the league. I'm just curious, did you get any input or insight into how this coaching search went down?
Sure. I mean, what I would say is the Indiana Fever have a new team president this year, and her name is Kelly Krauskopf, and she has kind of been with Pacer Sports and Entertainment, the parent company of the Fever, for more than the last 2 decades. She was actually the very first employee ever hired to run the Pacer or to run the Fever back in 1999. And so she was their kind of initial president, basketball decision maker, and she left in the mid 2010s to actually be the Indiana Pacers assistant GM. She returned this past year to again be the Fever team president. And so she hires Stephanie White, who she has known forever. Stephanie White was a player for the Indiana Fever, actually one of the very first players that Kelly Krauskopf picked in the 2000 WNBA expansion draft. She is a former Miss Indiana basketball in high school. She went to Purdue, won a national championship there. So they have really known each other for more than 2 decades and have built this closeness. Steph White was an assistant coach when Indiana, the Fever, won the WNBA championship in 2012. She was then, the head coach when they were runner-up in 2015. So there is a lot of continuity there, and there's a lot of connectedness there. And so, and I have a feature coming out later this week that gets into it. Like when Kelly Krauskopf is deciding on who to pick as their next head coach, like Stephanie White is a logical choice here because not only is she an accomplished coach and a great basketball mind, but also like they are very close in terms of personal relationships. They speak the same kind of language. They know how each other communicates. Like in a organization with some questions about roster, as I said, like relationship between front office and coach is not one of the questions that the Indiana Fever have this year.
So it doesn't sound like that Clark was involved in this process at all.
Yeah, I mean, what I know about Clark's kind of involvement, big picture, is that she has been involved. She's been president in Indiana throughout the offseason.
I saw that. Yeah.
And she has definitely been involved in, you know, free agency recruiting process. Talking to prospective free agents. She's involved in little things like what food, do you want on the road, that kind of thing. Her involvement is definitely high in the franchise, but I think this was really it
Hmm.
starts with Kelly Kroskoff is what I would say about how, some of these decisions were made.
So last year, the Fever kind of got a raw deal, right? Right after the draft, the season started. Caitlin Clark had just played a long college. It was tough, and they started out. They struggled out of the gate, but they found their footing and ultimately had a positive season. I'm just curious. Do you think, based on their schedule, that the league was like, you know what, we got to schedule more of these primetime TV games for Clark, and also, by the way, let's not wear her down. We kind of need Caitlin Clark in the playoffs.
Do I think they scheduled more primetime games for Caitlin Clark this year than last year? I
Yeah,
mean, absolutely. I mean, the
yeah.
data shows that they're on national television, and that includes something like, NBA TV and other platforms like that. Like I think 41 of their 44 games this year.
Wow.
That's the most of any team in the league. So certainly, the league has made its intentions very clear, and
Mm-hmm.
networks have said like we want those games, because you look at the ratings of those games, and the ratings are historically good. I mean, they played
Okay.
in a preseason game this year against Brazil. It was on May 4th. Caitlin Clark and the Fever returned to the University of Iowa. It averaged, I think, 1.3 million viewers. Again, this is a preseason game against the Brazilian national team. ESPN said, I think since 2010, of their like 57 preseason games in the NBA, only two have gotten a better rating than
Wow.
that WNBA game, and both of those involve LeBron. And I think it was like LeBron's return to Cleveland and Cavs Warriors one year. Like that's what we're talking about in terms of a preseason rating. So
Hmm.
we'll see what the regular season then brings.
So, do you think, as a result, and again, I'm not trying to stir up like an issue, but like, do other teams and players around the league be like, yo, we got the MVP, we're the defending champs. Why are we not on TV that much? Or are you of the impression that, hey, people get it? Hey, Caitlin Clark right now is the breadwinner for the league. Let's ride that out.
No, I think there's an understanding. I mean, New York and Las Vegas aren't that far behind in terms of national TV rights windows, and I think there's an understanding that like Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever are certainly accelerants and very
Mhm.
important to ratings, merchandise, awareness, and we've seen a lot of teams, benefit in their ticket sales when they play the Indiana Fever. So I think there's a recognition of
Yeah.
the Clark effect in the W.
Yeah, my wife and daughter, as soon as the schedule came out, were like, "So when is Caitlin Clark coming to play the Sparks? Can we get tickets? Well, we've got it circled. I'm trying to make it happen. They're pricey, but
Yeah,
let me ask about the season opener against Angel Reese and company. Now, Angel Reese has had a bit of an off season where she was like talking about a potential holdout because they need to get paid more. I'm just curious, where's Chicago in the hierarchy heading into the season, and your thoughts on Angel Reese as a player?
sure. I mean, I would first also clarify like there's an ongoing CBA negotiation right now, and kind of Reese's comments on her podcast regarding that, where that like the players have said that they want to accept a deal that is right for them. They're not just they're not hoping for a work stoppage, but they're saying like we are going to negotiate to kind of get the deal that we want, and we won't have more clarity there until the fall. So that's just one point of clarity there. In terms of the Chicago Sky and Angel Reese, I mean they have a first year head coach in Tyler Marsh who has a long player development background both with the Las Vegas Aces where he was an assistant coach and also has some NBA and NBA G League ties. They have overhauled some of their roster, and one of the things that kind of we would expect this year is she's going to play a little bit more on the perimeter and just as a means to kind of play in space.
Mm.
Tyler Marsh again came from the Aces where he coached Asia Wilson. If you watch her, she does a lot kind of at the high post, at the elbow, and the Sky have two bigs. Camila Cardozo was, their number 3 pick in the 2024 WNBA draft. She was a star at South Carolina, and so I would kind of expect a lot of high-low, big action,
Mm.
and a lot of action to try and get Angel going downhill and potentially kicking out to teammates. So that's one thing to be aware of. Chicago also signed Courtney Vandersloot, who is one of the all-time greatest passers in WNBA history. She had been with the franchise for more than a decade, then went to the New York Liberty for 2 years. These last 2 years, Vandersloot still, even though she's in her mid 30s, a very willing and a great passer. And so Reese kind of has a true point guard to help set her up and facilitate, and that should pay a bunch of dividends as well.
Let me go back to a point you were talking about the CBA.
Sure.
We see a new team, an expansion team, Golden State in the WNBA.
Yep.
How are we supposed to read that? Obviously, this has been in the works for years, but the expansion, the league kind of popping in the last couple of years, the interest in the draft, like you said, the offseason. Are you of the sense that the league, this is just the beginning of a WNBA expansion, and there's more down the pike?
Yeah, and that's already been confirmed with at least two teams. So this year, the WNBA is expanding to 13 teams. They're adding the Golden State Valkyries, as you said, first expansion team since 2008. Next year, there'll be two more expansion teams in the WNBA. Portland and Toronto are already announced. It'll be the Toronto Tempo. They've actually already hired a general manager who is a former player and front office exec. And then there's a question about when they will announce a 16th team. The league has said that they hope to do so by at least 2028. And we have
Okay.
seen already with that 16 team, and we'll see if it's 16 or, because of interest, they go even higher. There was a deadline this past January for prospective groups to submit bids. More than 10 groups ended up submitting bids. And a lot of
Wow.
those bidders have, NBA ties. So the ownership group of the Philadelphia 76ers, Dan Gilbert, the owner of the Cavs, Tom Gore's Detroit Pistons. There were some independent groups who definitely are trying to bid and get into the league, but we have continued to see, or we have seen an uptick in NBA owners wanting to
Yeah.
be part of the next round of expansion. And the Valkyries, we should say, owned by Joe Lacob and Peter Guber, who are the
Yeah.
owners and chairman of the Warriors.
So I guess we could wrap up. When the NBA expanded in the late '80s, early '90s, we saw there's a lot of complaints about it's a little watered down. There's just not enough good players. But that was way back in that was what 30 years ago, 40
Sure.
almost 40 years ago. I haven't looked at the Golden State Valkyries roster, but are you of the sense that like, hey man, there's room for a lot more good players in this league? Expansion's a great thing, or is this, do you think, maybe going to water down things a little?
No, I think expansion is definitely a good thing, and the business seems like it can support it. And I do think there's enough roster talent. I mean, right now we have a very high concentrated. There's a very high concentration of talent across the league. I mean, so many of these teams have two or three stars, and I think as a whole, the whole WNBA, you know, I would say 9 or 10 teams got better this offseason, and inevitably, not all those teams are even going to make the playoffs just because of how competitive the
Yeah.
league is. And so, the other thing that you see, and as we tape this, like it's roster cut week, cut down week, and so there's a lot of players who have been pretty successful in college who will not make teams. And WNBA teams, many of these teams are only going to roster 11 players to start the year, and so it's pretty much the hardest league to make in the world because of just how tight it is,
Yeah.
how few roster spots there are. Again, 13 teams, and most teams taking around 11 players because of salary cap reasons. And so, like, you expand, you add another team this year, two more next year. That's 12 and then 36 more players who are getting
Mhm.
opportunities that would not otherwise. And so, yeah, I think we're going to see a little bit more dispersal of talent, and that's natural in the case of any expansion draft and as the league expands. But yeah, there is talent and certainly gives players an opportunity to develop. Just by getting reps in a
Yeah.
WNBA context in a way that they wouldn't if they were not making these
I
rosters.
wonder, Ben, if that'll be part of the new CBA. Hey, we need to expand rosters. I mean, 11 is not a lot of people on a roster. You get 3 injuries, all of a sudden, some foul trouble in a game. It's dicey. Do you think that'll be part of the new CBA?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Because again, as you expand rosters, there's some, kind of contractual effects that take hold.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it has long been a clamoring that fans and even some execs have about like roster size versus expansion is always kind of a debate that kind of comes up. What is kind of better for the league at a certain period of time? There isn't a WNBA developmental league in the season, right, in the US, the same way that there is in the NBA. So,
Oh, yeah.
the kind of existence of, in the NBA, again, you have two-way contracts. Here in the W, like a player doesn't make a team, they get cut. How are they working on their game to then be best positioned to succeed when they get back in the WNBA? Like that's always a question that kind of
Mhm.
people have. You have to train on your own. There are alternatives. We see obviously a lot of players historically play in professional leagues overseas in the winter, but again, that doesn't help them continue to develop during the summer. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big question about what's the right number here? Again, 12 is the max that you can have on a roster, but because of cap reasons,
Yeah.
a lot of teams really only carry 11. So
Okay.
it is certainly a big topic of conversation going forward.
Yeah. All right. Ben Pickman, The Athletic. Great stuff. Hey, man, enjoy the WNBA season. I'm sure we'll be reading a lot of your stuff. Obviously, the big debut on Saturday. And talk to you soon, buddy.
Thanks a lot for having me.